Tonight, I'm telling you the story of Remy Callahan, a woman who agreed to fake date her coworker for one college reunion weekend and came home with something that she hadn't planned to feel. And now, let's begin.
The deal was simple. One weekend, one lie. I'd hold her hand in front of her ex, smile like I meant it, get through 2 dinners and a beach party and whatever else a 5-year college reunion throws at 2 women pretending to be in love, then drive back to the city and go back to being nothing to each other. That was exactly what I said yes to on a Tuesday afternoon over bad office coffee, when Petra Vane looked at me with those careful eyes and said she needed a favor. I should have asked more questions. I should have thought harder about what it means to perform something long enough that you stop remembering it's a performance. Nobody warned me I'd be the last one willing to walk away. Before we continue, comment below where in the world you are watching from, and please click like and subscribe for more GL stories. I was the most reasonable person I knew. That's not a brag, it was more of a character flaw dressed up in respectable clothing. I balanced my budget in a spreadsheet. I owned 2 plants and hadn't killed either of them, which in my apartment, with its complicated relationship with natural light, was basically a miracle. The point is, I was sensible. I made good choices. I thought things through, before committing to them. Which is why I still couldn't entirely explain how I ended up in the passenger seat of Petra Vane's rented hatchback on a Friday morning in September, driving 4 hours up the coast to a town called Halcyon Bay for a college reunion I hadn't attended, playing the girlfriend of a woman I'd known for exactly 8 months and 17 days. Yes, I had counted. I am that kind of person. I was only now starting to question whether being that kind of person had somehow led me directly here anyway. Petra was driving with both hands on the wheel and her sunglasses on, which meant I couldn't tell what she was thinking. She'd been quiet since we cleared the city, which was unusual. Petra was not, as a rule, a quiet person. She was the one in the office who remembered everyone's coffee order without being asked, who sent follow-up emails in under an hour, who had strong opinions about everything from campaign strategy to the correct way to load a dishwasher. Her silence now felt pressurized, like weather moving in. "We should probably go over the details again," I said. "We've been over the details 3 times. We've been over the broad strokes. The broad strokes are not the details." She exhaled through her nose, which I'd learned was Petra's equivalent of an eye roll. "What do you want to know?" "When did we get together?" "March, the design conference. I took you to that wine bar on Alderman Street." "Good. What was the wine?" "Does it matter?" "It matters if someone asks and we give different answers." "It was a Malbec." "I hate Malbec." "Then you tried a sip of mine, and hated it, and switched to gin and tonic, and it's weirdly charming in retrospect." I blinked. She'd actually thought about this. "Okay. That's very good." "I'm not incompetent, Remy." "I never said you were incompetent. I said you were panicking when you asked me." "I wasn't panicking. You asked me over a 3-minute window in the office elevator while holding 17 spreadsheets." Another nose exhale. I was efficiently allocating the time I had available. That was such a Petra sentence that I laughed, and the tension in my shoulders loosened by approximately 20%. That's how it worked with her. She could irritate me, and then accidentally charm me in the span of 2 minutes, and I'd never fully adjusted to the whiplash. I'd agreed to this for a few reasons, none of which I was planning to examine too closely while trapped in a car with her for 3 more hours. She'd asked me because she trusted me, which was rare and felt significant. Her actual friends were scattered across multiple time zones. I didn't have plans for the weekend. And Bex, my best friend and primary moral compass, had said, "Oh my God, do it. Obviously, you've been talking about her for 6 months." In a way that I strongly felt was not relevant to the situation, but also couldn't immediately argue with. What things weren't real. That was the important part. She'd been very direct about that. The reunion was 5 years post-graduation, held at the Halcyon Bay Resort, which had apparently been the location of several parties, one emotionally significant argument, and at least 2 bad decisions, none of which were mine because I hadn't been there. The problem, she'd explained in the elevator, was Corrine. Corrine had been Petra's girlfriend from sophomore to senior year. 2 years, the kind of length that leaves marks. They'd ended badly. Petra hadn't gone into specifics, and Corrine was not only attending this reunion, but had gotten engaged to someone lovely, and was going to be relentlessly fine in front of everyone. Petra didn't care about Corrine anymore. She'd been very clear about that. What she cared about was not arriving alone to a weekend where every other person in her friend group had a partner, where she'd be forced to explain, for what sounded like the 430th time, why she was still single. "I'm not sad about being single," she'd said in the elevator, spreadsheets clutched to her chest. "I just don't want to spend the entire weekend being asked about it by people who love me and will somehow make it worse." I understood that completely, which was why I'd said yes before I'd thought it through properly, and now here we were, 4 hours from the city, 3 hours from Halcyon Bay, and I was doing a relationship quiz about fictional wine. "Tell me about the friend group," I said, because practical information felt safer than thinking about why I'd agreed. Petra's posture settled slightly, like she'd been waiting for me to get useful. "Ren is my oldest friend. She'll be the first one to ask questions, and she's sharp. Don't give her anything vague." "What kind of person is she?" "Warm, perceptive. She'll like you immediately, which makes it harder, because she'll actually want to get to know you." "Who else?" "Danny and her husband Ollie. They'll be happy you're there, because it evens out the table. Theo, who's been Ren's situationship for 2 years, and neither of them will admit it. And Corrine." A pause. "And Corrine's fiancé, whose name is apparently Hart, which I find suspicious. Hart is a perfectly normal name. It's the name of a man who's very confident about his own charm." "You've never met him." "I'm inferring." I looked at her profile, the neat line of her jaw, the way she kept her chin slightly lifted when she was being stubborn. "You don't still have feelings for Corrine." "No," Petra said, and there was nothing complicated in it. "I haven't for a long time. I just want to exist this weekend without being someone's project, without having Ren look at me with that careful sweetness she uses when she's worried." She paused. "I am fine." "I know. Better than fine. Petra, I believe you." She glanced over, briefly, and something in her expression shifted before she looked back at the road. "Sorry. I know this is strange. You're doing me a significant favor." "I'm doing you a favor. That also involves a free long weekend at a coastal resort, so let's not overdo the gratitude." Another nose exhale, softer, almost a laugh. "I booked us a room." I noticed on the itinerary, yes. It has 2 beds. The itinerary said 1 king and a pull-out. Her hands tightened on the wheel. "The pull-out has a proper mattress. I checked the reviews." "Petra, it's fine." And it was. I was a grown woman. I'd shared accommodation with people I knew less well than Petra Vane. I'm not worried about the room. "Okay. Are you worried about the room?" "No." I let that sit for a moment. Outside, the coast road had opened up, water appearing on the left, silver gray and vast. September light at 10 in the morning, the kind that makes everything look slightly more significant than it probably is. "You have a tell," I said. "I don't have a tell." "When you're worried, you say okay, like you're filing it away and hoping I won't bring it up again." Silence. Long enough to be confirmation. "I'll work on that," she said finally. "Please don't, it's useful to me." "That's alarming. You hired a fake girlfriend. You should expect some level of observation." Her mouth moved, and I caught the edge of it before she straightened her face. Petra's smiles were something she seemed to deploy carefully, like they cost her something she'd rather keep in reserve. With everyone else, she was professional and warm in a smooth, curated way. The smiles that slipped through were different, faster, less polished, and they made her look younger. I turned back to the road. I thought about Bex, who had dropped me off this morning with a bag of snacks and the expression of someone watching a nature documentary and hoping for the best. "You're going to fall in love with her," Bex had said. "I'm going to do a favor for a colleague," I'd replied. "Yeah. Okay. Text me from the emergency room." The thing about Bex was that she was right about most things, and she'd been right about me talking about Petra for 6 months. What I felt about Petra was difficult to categorize. I noticed her. Not in a way that impaired my function, but in the way you notice when someone has left a room because the air shifts. I knew the way she held her pen when she was concentrating, the way she touched the back of her own neck when she was frustrated, the way she laughed when something genuinely caught her off guard, which was rare, a bright, startled thing she always seemed slightly embarrassed by afterward. I knew these things because I paid attention to her, and I paid attention because she was interesting in a way that didn't announce itself. I'd decided, very reasonably, that what I felt was admiration, and some level of attraction I'd shelved because she was a colleague, and because the last time I'd let attraction make my decisions for me, I'd spent 6 months in a relationship that felt like assembling furniture without the manual. I had the manual now. One weekend, 2 beds, friendly performance, drive home, return to normal. The manual did not account for September light on coastal water, or for the way she'd packed a cooler with good sandwiches without mentioning it until I was hungry, or the fact that she'd put a playlist on, the right kind of morning music for a long drive, without asking me first. "Tell me something your reunion friends know that I should know," I said. "I have a scar on my left hand from a boating accident when I was 19. "What kind of boating accident?" "The kind where you're 19, and on a lake, and you make an overconfident decision in front of witnesses." "Ren was there?" "Ren was there, and Corrine, and Danny. It's a founding myth of the group now." She paused. "Remy Callahan survived it without medical attention." I caught the error a half-second before she did. "Remy Callahan," I said slowly. She went very still. "I said your name instead of my own name." "You did." "On a story about myself. A founding myth, technically." Her breath came out in a sound I could only describe as mortification. "I'm going to blame the drive." "You can blame whatever you want. But maybe practice saying your own name a few more times before we arrive." "Petra Vane." She said it with the firmness of someone making a correction to a legal document. "Petra Vane survived the boating accident. Petra Vane had 4 stitches." "And the scar?" She held her left hand up briefly. Near the base of the thumb, a thin, pale line, maybe 3 centimeters. I filed it away without meaning to. "I'll know it if it comes up," I said. She lowered her hand. "Thank you. I actually mean that." "I know you do. I'm not great at relying on people." "I've noticed." "That's not meant as a weakness." I didn't take it as one. Another silence, softer now. The car smelled like good coffee from the thermos she'd brought, and the faint, clean smell of ocean through the slightly open window. I ate one of the sandwiches from the cooler because I hadn't had breakfast, and she reached over and took one too without asking, which struck me as unbearably ordinary and also somehow significant. We drove like that for a while, music and sandwiches and the coast going blue and glittering beside us. I sat with a feeling I was choosing, very deliberately, not to name. I'd name it later. On the drive home, probably. The sensible timeline had always been the drive home. Halcyon Bay was the kind of coastal town that knew exactly what it was and had made peace with it. Charming in the way resort towns are charming, slightly theatrical about it, with a harbor full of sailboats and a main street of boutiques selling expensive things made to look casual. The resort sat on a bluff above the water, a converted Victorian building with a wraparound porch and wide windows, and the particular air of somewhere that had hosted a significant number of significant conversations. Petra pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat there for exactly 4 seconds. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I agreed. "We're doing this. We're doing this." She turned to look at me, with her sunglasses pushed up on her head and the September light through the windshield. She looked different from the office version of herself. Less curated. There were faint shadows under her eyes, probably from a bad night's sleep, and a strand of hair had come loose. She looked like a person and not a presentation, and something about that landed in my chest with more weight than I'd planned for. "If it gets too weird," she said, "just squeeze my hand twice. The signal for things going sideways is I say I need to check on the room. The signal for you're laying it on too thick is I'll use your full name. Remy Callahan, got it." Petra. I reached over and put my hand briefly on hers, where it rested on the gear shift, then pulled it back. "Nothing's going to go wrong. We're going to walk in there and you're going to introduce me as your girlfriend, and I'm going to be completely believable. And Corrine is going to see that you're happy and thriving, because you are, even without me. And by Sunday night we'll be driving back and laughing about all of it." I held her gaze. "Okay?" Something moved across her face that I couldn't quite name. "Okay," she said. We got out of the car. She came around to my side and her hand found mine, tentative at first, and then settled, like a question that had decided to be a statement. Her palm was warm. Her grip was light. I adjusted my fingers to fit against hers. It was practice. It was practical. I told myself both of these things firmly as we walked toward the entrance. I kept telling myself as we pushed through the glass door and immediately nearly walked into Ren. Ren was not what I'd expected from Petra's description. Or rather, she was exactly what I'd expected, which made her more alarming. She was taller than Petra, with natural hair in a wide crown and the kind of open face that made you want to tell her things almost immediately. She took one look at Petra and made a sound of genuine delight, and they collided in the kind of hug that requires a moment of stillness afterward. "Oh, I've missed your face," Ren said. "Hi, Ren." "Don't you hi Ren me. We haven't seen each other since February." She pulled back, held Petra at arm's length, then her eyes cut to me. Not with suspicion. With interest. "This is Remy," Petra said, and something in the way she said it made Ren's eyes go soft. "Hi," I said. "She's told me a lot about you." "She hasn't told me nearly enough about you," Ren replied. Her handshake was warm and firm and brief, the handshake of someone who'd already made up their mind. "Come on, everyone's already at the bar." Petra's hand found mine again as we followed Ren through the lobby. Part of the deal. Also, if I was being honest with myself, something I'd been not quite thinking about for a while, and the reality of it was disorienting in a way I hadn't anticipated. Her hand was a particular shape. I noticed the shape. I told myself that was observation, not feeling. The bar was a long room with windows overlooking the water, afternoon light laying gold stripes across the floorboards. Danny saw us first and launched herself at Petra, and then there was Ollie, easy and cheerful, extending a hand and saying it was great to finally put a face to the name. Which meant Petra had mentioned me before this, before the reunion. That was interesting. I filed it away. Theo gave Petra a brief solid hug and then looked at me with the guarded assessment of someone figuring out where a new person fits. I gave him the easy client-facing smile, and he relaxed by a degree or two. And then there was Corrine. I recognized her from the photo Petra had showed me. Polished and composed, with very good hair and a quality to her stillness that was adjacent to confidence. She was sitting near the window, and when she saw Petra, she smiled the practiced smile of someone who'd rehearsed this moment and done it well. "Petra, you look amazing." "Corrine!" Petra's voice was entirely steady. "You too. And this must be..." "Remy," I said, before Petra had to do it. "Hi. I've heard good things." Corine's eyes measured me briefly. Not hostilely, assessingly. I smiled back, easy and direct. "Hart's getting something from the room," she said. "He'll be back in a minute." The air between Petra and Corrine was not hostile. It was the more complex atmosphere of two people who'd once known each other very well and were existing on the other side of that, politely and without visible damage. I felt Petra's hand, still in mine, and squeezed once. Not the code squeeze, just a squeeze. Her fingers tightened around mine, briefly, and then relaxed. We settled into the early social rhythms of a reunion group. I watched Petra do it and was quietly astonished by how good she was at it. She was funnier here than at the office, sharper and more self-deprecating, and the people in this room had clearly loved her for a long time. Ren kept touching her arm when she laughed. Danny asked about work in a way that showed she'd actually remembered previous conversations. Theo relaxed visibly once Petra was fully present in the room. I was, theoretically, there as a prop. I kept finding things to notice instead. The way Petra leaned in when Ren was talking, like the words were worth the effort of proximity. The way she accepted a drink from the bartender and almost immediately held it out to me first, an instinctive gesture without theater behind it. The way she said my name when she drew me into a story, not the way you say a stranger's name, but with an ease that made it sound habitual. I had been in her life for 8 months. She'd made me sound like longer. Hart arrived, loud and tall and clearly very happy, and when he came to Corrine, there was the unambiguous ease of someone who wasn't threatened by anything in any room. I decided immediately that I liked him, which was slightly inconvenient given my position. That first evening was, mostly, more than fine. I liked Ren with the immediacy of meeting someone who pays real attention. I liked Danny, who made me feel immediately like I'd met her before. I liked Ollie, who asked careful questions about my work that weren't small talk. I watched Petra laugh at something Ren said, and thought, with a kind of clear, aching recognition, that she was happy here. That this had nothing to do with me, that I was glad for her anyway. At some point, Corrine drifted toward us at the far edge of the group, while Petra was caught up in a story Danny was telling. "She's doing well," Corrine said quietly. "For just me. She always does." Corrine considered me for a moment. "You really care about her?" It wasn't a question. I hadn't performed anything obvious, but Corrine had known Petra for years, and maybe she was reading something in the way I tracked where Petra was in the room. "Yes," I said, because it was true, whatever shape the truth was. Corrine nodded. "Good." Then she drifted back toward Hart, and I stood with my sparkling water and the specific, stomach-dropping feeling of having said something entirely honest, entirely by accident. The room had 2 beds in the way that hotel rooms sometimes technically have 2 beds, meaning one very good bed and one piece of furniture with aspirations. I claimed the aspirational pullout without ceremony, which Petra protested and I overruled. "I checked the reviews," she said. "I respect the research, it's fine. You're doing me the favor. I'm also the one who can sleep anywhere. Stop arguing." She changed out of her travel clothes while I laid out the pullout, and when she came out in softer clothes with her hair down, I realized I hadn't previously seen Petra with her hair down. It changed her face significantly, softened the angles, made her look less like someone running a campaign and more like someone who lived somewhere. I was going to need a more reliable cognitive sorting system than the one I currently had. "You okay?" I asked. "Yes." She sat on the edge of the real bed. "Corrine looks good." "She does." "That's fine. I'm just noting it." "You're allowed to note it." "She seemed to talk to you." "Briefly." "What did she say?" "I thought about it. That you looked well." A pause. "And that she could tell I actually cared about you." "I told her I did." Petra went quiet. "Is that a problem?" I asked. "No." Her voice was slightly unsteady in a way that made me want to ask a follow-up I didn't have the right to ask. "No, thank you." I turned back to making the pullout. Outside, the ocean was doing something dramatic with the last of the daylight, going bronze and then deep gold. I could hear it through the window we'd cracked. water pressing at the shore in long repeating lines. Remy. Yeah? For what it's worth. She paused. You're very easy to take somewhere. I didn't know what to do with that sentence, so I tucked it into the same drawer as Corrine's observation and told myself I'd examine everything later. Get some sleep, I said. You've got a whole day of being happy and thriving tomorrow. She laughed, low and genuine. You say that like it's difficult. I say that like you've been tense since the city limits, and I'd like you to relax for 5 consecutive minutes. Okay, she said. Okay? The lights went out. I lay in the pull-out in the dark and listened to the ocean and the sound of Petra's breathing across the room, and tried to locate the reasonable version of myself who had made a very simple plan for this weekend. She didn't seem to be in the room. I figured she'd turn up eventually. Saturday started with breakfast on the resort porch, 8 of us at a long table in golden morning light. I sat next to Petra. We'd established, by unspoken consensus, that adjacent was the right distance. Not performing, not creating theater, just existing close. Her knee touched mine occasionally under the table. Ren sat across from us, and I was aware of her attention the way you're aware of someone who's good at their job. Not obvious, just present. How long did you say? She asked at one point. March, Petra said easily. March, Ren repeated. So 6 months. About that? And you work together. Different departments, I said. Same building. Ren nodded. Something behind her expression sharpened. It's interesting, because Petra mentioned you before March. A beat of silence that could have been anything. She mentioned someone from work she found interesting, Ren continued. That was October, I think. Petra's knee pressed against mine under the table, steady and deliberate. She didn't say we hadn't met before March, I said. We'd known each other for a while. We just made it official in March. I looked at Petra. Right? She looked back at me, and for a moment, the space between us felt too warm for the role we were playing. Right? She said. Ren's expression did something complicated and landed somewhere that looked like cautiously pleased. She dropped it and moved on to asking Danny about renovations, and I exhaled slowly and reached for my coffee. Under the table, Petra pressed her knee against mine again. Once. Brief. Something that could have been deliberate or accidental. I chose not to decide which. The afternoon had a scheduled walk along the coastal path, which was, objectively, the kind of setting designed to make things complicated. The group spread out, and Petra and I ended up toward the back, where the path narrowed between rock and seagrass, and we had to walk closer out of necessity. She kept her shoulder against mine when the wind came. I kept mine against hers. How are you doing? She asked, looking at the water. I should be asking you that. I'm asking you. I'm good. I like your friends. They like you. A pause. Ren really likes you. Ren is suspicious of me. Those aren't mutually exclusive with Ren. She glanced over. The wind had lifted her hair sideways, and she tucked it back without noticing. Thank you for the October thing at breakfast. I wasn't sure whether to go with it or walk it back. No, it was right. It was actually right. I looked at her. Was it? She looked back at me, slower than her usual speed. We did know each other before March, she said carefully. The October thing is true. The October thing implies something other than colleagues. Maybe that's because there was something other than colleagues. The path curved. The wind gusted. Below us, waves broke against rock in long, rolling white lines. Petra, I said, carefully. Never mind. She looked back at the water. I just meant you handled it well. I took the off-ramp because taking it was the sensible choice. I noted that the sensible choice and I were getting increasingly hard to keep on speaking terms. But I took it anyway, because there was still a day and a half to survive, and I was a reasonable person, and the plan was still technically intact. Saturday's dinner was at a restaurant in the old part of Halcyon Bay that held its own mythology. Long table, good wine, the ease of a group that had eaten many meals together. Hart told a story about a sailing trip that was genuinely funny. Danny and Ollie argued pleasantly about a film in a way that made everyone around them feel warmly about functional disagreement. Theo made a toast that suggested he'd been meaning to say it for a while. I sat beside Petra. We shared a dessert, without deciding to, my fork crossing to her plate, hers to mine, a small domestic natural thing. Under the table, her fingers found mine at some point, and stayed there, and I didn't check whether anyone was watching, I just held on. She's not watching, Ren said quietly, from my other side. I looked at her. Corrine, she clarified, gently. She's not watching you two. She's genuinely happy. She's not checking. I felt my face do something I couldn't quite control. I wasn't. I know, Ren said, and there was something in her expression now that was all warmth and no judgment, and it made me feel terribly exposed. It's okay. She turned back to her own conversation, and I sat with Petra's hand in mine, and the distinct, stomach-dropping feeling of someone else having seen something I hadn't quite let myself look at directly yet. It was after dinner, back at the hotel, when things went quiet and real. Not dramatically, the way actual things tend to go. We'd come back to the room. Petra sat on the edge of the real bed and leaned back on her hands and looked at the ceiling. I sat on the pullout. Gave her space. Waited. She looked happy, Petra said finally. Corrine. She genuinely looked happy. She did. I'm not sad about that. I know. It's been 3 years. I'm completely fine. Petra, I believe you. She kept looking at the ceiling. I'm realizing that I spent a significant amount of energy this week dreading how this weekend would feel, and it doesn't feel the way I thought it would. How did you think it would feel? She was quiet for a moment. Like I'd have to prove something, like I'd have to perform being okay. A pause. But I don't feel like I'm performing. I feel like... She stopped. I waited. I feel like I'm with someone, she said, very quietly. The room went still. Not externally, the ocean was still there. Someone laughed somewhere down the hall, but internally still, the kind that happens in the space between one sentence and what follows it. Petra, I said carefully. She sat up, looked at me. She wasn't unraveling. She was looking at me like someone who'd made a calculation and had decided to say it out loud. I know this isn't what we agreed to, she said. Petra. I know. I'm not asking for anything. She pressed her hands together, that small familiar gesture of self-discipline I recognized from the office. I need you to know that today didn't feel fake to me. Any of it. And I wanted you to know that before we spent another night in this room, pretending I'm fine with what tomorrow is going to feel like. What is tomorrow going to feel like? Like the end of something I didn't understand was real until about 3 hours ago. I sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the ocean did its relentless thing against the shore. I thought about October, the way she'd said my name at breakfast, the knee under the table, the shared dessert, the hand I'd been holding all evening that hadn't felt like performance since approximately the first hour. I opened the drawer I'd been filing things into all weekend and looked at everything in it, and found that what I'd been calling admiration had a different name, and had had it for quite a while. I stood up from the pullout, crossed the room, sat down on the edge of the real bed, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. When you called it fake, I said quietly, were you trying to convince me or yourself? Petra turned her head, close enough now that I could see the slight catch in her breathing. Both, she said. Neither. A beat. I don't know. When did you stop finding it convincing? October, I said. She went very still. I'm not saying it to make a point. I'm saying it because you said the October thing is true, and I think I've been honest with everyone in this room this weekend except you and me, and I'd like to stop doing that. Petra looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face, complicated and then less complicated, the way clouds move off to reveal what the sky actually looks like. I watched it happen. She didn't say anything. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead very lightly to my shoulder, and I felt her exhale like she'd been holding the breath since the city limits. I put my hand over hers where it rested between us. We stayed like that for a long time, not making it into anything yet, just staying in the space where the thing had been named, and the name was heavier and more careful than fake, and I thought it would hold. "We should probably sleep," she said finally, muffled slightly by the fact that she hadn't moved. "We probably should." She lifted her head, looked at me, her expression soft in a way I hadn't seen before, though I thought maybe I'd been waiting to see it for quite a while. "The pullout really is fine," she said. "I know." I stood up, went back to the pullout, lay in the dark again with the ocean and the sound of her breathing across the room, but the dark felt different this time. Warmer, more like something than like nothing. Tomorrow was Sunday. Sunday was the last day. I was going to have to figure out what that meant. Sunday morning came in pale and quiet, the ocean fog sitting low over the bay, and the light through the resort windows soft and gray. I was awake before Petra, lying on the pullout, listening to her breathe in the other bed, and thinking about what she'd said. "I feel like I'm with someone." The thing about honest sentences is that once they're loose in a room, they rearrange everything you thought you understood about it. I'd spent the night trying to locate the version of this weekend that made sense as a simple story. A favor, a performance, a clean line with a start here and an end there. I kept not finding it. What I found instead was a collection of moments that refused to be anything other than what they were. Her hand in mine that had felt natural from the first minute. Her knee under the table, the way she'd said my name at breakfast, like she'd been saying it longer. The way she'd leaned her forehead against my shoulder in the dark, and underneath all of it, the October thing. The fact that she'd mentioned me before we were anything at all. Petra understood things fully before she claimed them. She prepared before she arrived. She'd packed the cooler, and planned the playlist, and rehearsed the wine story, and still called herself Remy Callahan by accident, because some things don't go the way preparation intends. She stirred around 7. I was sitting at the window with coffee I'd made badly from the in-room machine, watching the fog move over the water. "You're a morning person," she said, not accusatory, just confirming. "I apologize." "No, you don't." "You're right, I don't." She sat up, pulled her hair back with a band from her wrist, and I watched her do it and thought about how ordinary it was and how completely undone by it I was anyway. There should have been a more dignified response. I didn't have one. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Fine. Good. The fog is doing something interesting out there." "Remy, I know what you're asking." "Then answer it." I turned from the window. She was sitting cross-legged on the real bed, watching me with the focused attention she usually reserved for documents she was trying to understand from the inside out. "I'm still me," I said, "and you're still you. Whatever happened last night doesn't have to change how today goes if you'd rather it didn't." "What if I want it to change how today goes?" I held her gaze. "Then we're going to have a conversation I think we're both a little frightened of." "I'm not frightened." "Petra, I'm not," she said, and then, "I'm terrified, but I'd like to have it anyway." I put down the terrible coffee, crossed the room, sat across from her on the folded back pullout, knees nearly touching hers. "Okay," I said, "then have it." She looked at me steadily. "I brought you here because I trusted you. I trust maybe 6 people with significant things, and you're one of them, and I've been trying to figure out when that happened, and I think the answer is October, which is the same answer you gave me." "Yes. I also," she paused, gathered herself in that small, particular way. "I've been not quite honest with myself about why I specifically wanted to bring you. Not just someone, you. I told myself it was because you were available, and discreet, and could do this convincingly. All of which is true. But I also wanted you here. For this weekend. Not as a prop, as you. Something warm and precise settled in my chest. And I don't know what to do with that, she continued. Because I'm aware that what I'm describing sounds like I used a fake dating arrangement too. She made a gesture that covered everything and nothing. To spend a weekend with someone you actually wanted to spend a weekend with. When you phrase it like that, it sounds reasonable and also slightly manipulative. It's mostly just human. I wasn't trying to trick you. I know, and I did. Petra didn't operate like that. What she did was the far more recognizable thing of not quite looking at what she actually wanted until circumstances forced the look. Neither was I. I could have said no. Why didn't you? I thought about Bex standing in the doorway. Because I wanted to spend the weekend with you too. Petra let out a slow breath. So, I said. So, she agreed. We sat for a moment in the quiet. Outside, the fog was lifting, the bay beginning to show itself, gray turning to silver, turning to something that might become blue by afternoon. The deal was one weekend, she said. Yes. Today's the last day. Yes. When we drive back, she stopped. What? She looked at me, and it was want rather than frustration, barely hidden behind her voice. I don't want to drive back and go to work on Monday and have it be 8 months ago again. Then we don't. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. The complicated part is everything before the decision. The decision is just a decision. Petra. I leaned forward slightly. I've been paying attention to you for 8 months. Not as a colleague, as a person I'm interested in. If you're asking whether I want to keep paying attention after today, the answer is yes. Emphatically. So the question isn't what we do with the weekend. The question is whether you want the same thing going forward. She looked at me for a long time. The morning light was doing something gentle to her face, and I thought, not for the first time, that she was very beautiful in a way that didn't seem to notice itself. Yes, she said. Okay then. Okay then, she repeated. And that was it. No music, no grand gesture, just the word, and the morning light, and her looking at me, and me looking back, and the particular quiet of something that had always been true, finally deciding to announce itself out loud. I reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the one she'd missed with the tie. She let me. Her expression when I did it was very soft and slightly off balance, like someone who'd been bracing for a fight and found there wasn't one. We still have today, I said. We still have today, she agreed. So let's go have it. We went to breakfast. Ren looked at us when we came down, and her expression shifted into something that looked like relief wrapped in satisfaction, though she said nothing, just pulled out 2 chairs and asked what we wanted. Danny caught it too. She didn't say anything either. She just poured my coffee before I could ask, which I accepted as the kindness it was. The morning was easy in the way things get easy when you've stopped trying to manage what they mean. We walked the harbor with the group after breakfast, the fog fully lifted, the bay going the specific blue of September on the coast. Hart bought everyone ice cream from a stand near the pier, including me, which felt like formal acceptance into something. Corrine walked beside Petra for a while, and they talked in a low, easy way, the sound of 2 people who had once mattered to each other very much and had found a way to exist on the other side of that without damage. Ren drifted beside me. She mentioned you in October, she said, without preamble. I know. She said she'd met someone at work who thought about things differently than anyone she'd known in a while, someone who made her feel like she was still figuring herself out, but in a good way. I looked at the water. She didn't tell me that. No, she wouldn't. She's very careful with the things that actually matter. Ren paused. You have to learn to read the things she doesn't say out loud. I've been learning. She's been better this year, Ren said. More like herself, the version I'd missed. She glanced at me. I have a guess about why. I didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything more honest I could add. Take care of her, Ren said. Not an instruction. An observation about the future. I will, I said. The afternoon was the last proper event, a slow, informal gathering on the resort lawn that became gradually, cheerfully less structured as the afternoon went on. Someone put music on. Hart produced a Bluetooth speaker he was very proud of. Danny and Ollie danced to something slightly off-tempo with the ease of people who'd been dancing together for years. Theo asked Ren to dance, and she said yes after only a second's hesitation that I pretended not to notice. Corrine found us near the edge of the lawn, me and Petra standing close, my hand at Petra's lower back, because the evening was going golden, and I'd stopped tracking whether it was performance or not, sometime around when it stopped feeling like either one. I want you both to know, Corrine said, looking at Petra mostly, with a warmth that was clean and real, that I'm genuinely glad you came. And I'm glad you're... She gestured between us, precise and kind. I didn't know if you were okay. I'm glad you are. Petra looked at her. I am, she said. Actually. Corrine nodded. Something passed between them. The specific passing of something carried a long time and finally set down. Then it was done. Corrine went back to Hart, who was enthusiastically explaining the speaker's playlist settings to whoever would listen. Petra turned slightly toward me. We were very close, and the light was warm on her face. You know what the reunion gave me, she said. Besides a very good excuse to use the coastal highway? Her mouth curved. Permission, she said. To want what I actually want. I'd been so careful for so long about keeping things manageable that I forgot that wanting things is allowed. That it doesn't automatically mean they'll hurt you. It might. Everything worth it might. She held my gaze. That's not an argument against wanting. No, I agreed. It's not. I took her hand, not for the group, not for Corrine, just because it was there and I wanted to. She looked down at our joined hands, then back up at me with an expression I was going to keep. Dance with me, I said. Hart put on something slow. Hart put on something terrible. Hart put on something slow and terrible. Dance with me anyway. She laughed and let me pull her toward the others, and we danced on the resort lawn in the amber late afternoon light, with the bay going copper behind us, and Ren watching from the side with the expression of someone who'd been patient about something for a long time and had just found out the wait was worth every minute. We left Sunday evening after the farewells. Ren held Petra for a long time and said something quietly against her ear that made Petra close her eyes briefly. I said my own goodbye to Ren, who gripped my forearm instead of shaking my hand. I expect to actually meet you sometime soon, she said. Me too, I said. We drove back into the sunset, west and south. Petra drove. I sat in the passenger seat, same as Friday morning, and the radio had something quiet going, and the coast moved past on the right now, everything familiar but reversed. We didn't talk much for the first hour. Not the pressurized silence of the drive up. Something else. The kind of quiet that comes when there's nothing urgent left to say because the important things have already been said. What are you thinking about? She asked eventually. Bex. Your friend. She told me I was going to fall in love with you. Petra's hand tightened briefly on the wheel. What did you say? I told her I was doing a favor for a colleague. And now? I looked at the road ahead of us, the city beginning to appear at the edges. Now I'm thinking about how long she's been right about things I've been calling sensible decisions. Remy. I'm not saying the word, I said. Not tonight. Too soon for the word, and I'm a reasonable person. You're the most reasonable person I know. Thank you. That's not entirely a compliment. I know. I turned to look at her profile, the city light beginning to catch her edges. But I'm telling you that whatever word I'm not saying yet, it's been pointing in your direction. For longer than either of us has admitted out loud. She breathed in slowly. Okay. Okay, I agreed. She reached over with her right hand, palm up. An invitation. I put mine in it. She drove the last hour into the city like that, one hand on the wheel and one holding mine, and the skyline grew around us and the lights came on, and I thought about October and the 8 months between it and now, and I thought about how the most real thing of the weekend had been the thing we'd called fake, and how that seemed, in retrospect, entirely predictable. Monday morning, I went to the office, got coffee, sat at my desk, opened 3 files I'd been supposed to work on Friday. At 9:43, Petra appeared at the edge of my workspace. Work clothes, composed expression, carrying a coffee she'd made properly from the good machine in the kitchen. She put it on the edge of my desk, which was something she'd done, I now realized with perfect clarity, more than once over the past 8 months, quietly and without drawing attention to it. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She looked at me for a moment. Professional, contained, the office version of herself. Under it, something warm that hadn't been there before Friday, or maybe had been there for a while, and I was only now allowed to read it. "The room report," she said. "The pullout was fine." I knew it. "You were right." A small smile, quick and real, the fast, dangerous one. "I'll send you the review link. For future reference." For future reference, I agreed. She started back toward her side of the office. Got about 4 steps. "Petra." She turned. "Tonight," I said. "Dinner. Somewhere that isn't an office and isn't a reunion, and has nothing to do with any arrangement we may or may not have made. Just us." She looked at me for a long moment. The office moved around us. Phones, keyboards, someone's distant laugh. "Malbec?" she said. "You can have Malbec. I'll have gin and tonic." That was exactly the smile. The unguarded one. Briefly younger, briefly all the way hers. 6:30, she said. "There's a place on Alderman Street." I know the place. She turned back toward her desk, and I watched her go, and I thought about October. 8 months of filing things away. A fake deal, and a real weekend. A pull-out mattress, and the sound of the ocean, and her forehead against my shoulder in the dark. I pulled out my phone and texted Bex. "You were right." The response arrived in 11 seconds. Obviously. "Now give me everything." I laughed at my desk, which drew a glance from the person next to me, who I waved off without explanation. There wasn't a short version. The first real date was easy, in the way things are easy when they've been practiced, when the performance has run long enough to reveal that it was never a performance at all. Alderman Street, the wine bar, a table by the window, with the city going bright and dark outside, and Petra across from me, with her hair down and a glass of Malbec she didn't finish because she kept using her hands when she talked. She used her hands a lot. I'd noticed it in the office, but it was more visible here. This animation that came out when she was comfortable, and the fact that she was comfortable here, with me, on purpose, felt like something being given rather than taken. We stayed until the bar was nearly empty. "Tell me something I don't know," I said. She thought about this. I cried at the end of a nature documentary last week. About seals. Were the seals okay? Mostly. Tell me something else. I've thought about quitting marketing approximately 80 times this year and never done anything about it because I don't know what else I'd do. What would you do? Something with actual people, not campaigns, not audiences, individuals. A pause. I have no idea yet. That sounds like a valid thing to figure out. "Tell me something I don't know about you," she said. I thought about it. I've had the same playlist on repeat for 6 months. I told myself it was for when I was working. It's mostly sad songs about people who want things they can't quite reach. A beat. Remy. I know. She looked at me across the table and shook her head slowly, something between disbelief and warmth. All this time. All this time, I agreed. We wasted so much of it. We didn't, actually. I leaned forward slightly. We were paying attention. We just didn't have words for it yet. That's not the same as wasting it. Her expression softened. Is that a generous way of saying we were both being cowards? I'd say cautious. Very kind of you. She reached across the table, touched my hand, lightly, the back of 2 fingers against my knuckles, the same contact as all weekend but different now. Intentional in a new way. I'm sorry for phrasing it as a deal. Even if it got us here, I should have just asked you to dinner. You wouldn't have, I said. Not yet. Neither of us would have. Sometimes you need an elaborate detour to end up at the obvious place. The obvious place being Alderman Street. The obvious place being here. I turned my hand over under hers. With you. She looked at our hands, then at me, and whatever she'd been carrying since we drove back, the careful composure, the managed distance, the version of herself that processed things thoroughly before allowing them to be real, she let some of it down. Enough that I could see her, the actual her, underneath the preparation. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I said. She had Malbec. I had gin and tonic. The city pressed warm at the windows, and we stayed until closing, and I thought about all the Mondays between October and September, and about the drive up the coast, and about the particular miracle of 2 people who'd been paying attention to each other for months and had finally decided to say so. Bex met her a week later. She'd arranged it casually, a Saturday lunch, and when Petra arrived, Bex stood up and said directly, "I'm Bex. I know everything. I'm very glad this finally happened." And Petra, to my enormous relief, laughed. It was a good lunch. Bex asked questions that were genuinely curious and occasionally pointed, and Petra answered with the frankness she used when she'd decided someone was worth being frank with. At one point, Bex said, "She talks about the way you think, like it's something she discovered." And Petra looked at me with an expression that tightened my chest in a good way, and I looked back at her in a way that probably said everything I'd been saying in a dozen quieter ways for months. "You two are going to be horribly good together," Bex said on her way out. Offensive, really. "You're the one who told me to go," I pointed out. "And I was pay." "Right, that's my entire point." Petra watched her leave. "I like her. She's insufferable, and she's always right. It's her primary skill." Sounds powerful. "She's been weaponizing it at me since we were 23. Petra turned back to me. Still at the table, afternoon light coming through the windows long and warm. Her coffee sat mostly untouched because she'd been talking more than drinking it. She had a habit of getting interested in things and forgetting the practical objects around her. "I've been thinking," she said. "About? The weekend. What it actually gave me." She turned her mug in her hands. "I keep going back to Saturday night. What I said about not feeling like I was performing. I remember. The thing is, I think I hadn't felt like myself in a while. Not for a bad reason. I was just focused on being good at things. Work, friendships, the version of me that ran well and didn't make things complicated. And I was good at it. I just forgot to check whether I was happy." "And are you?" "More than I expected." She looked at me. "That's you. Partially." "Only partially?" Don't get smug. "I'm not smug. I'm invested in the full accounting." "You're both." She set the mug down. "But also, I think I was ready. Ready to stop managing and just be somewhere. I feel like I'm somewhere now." It was a small sentence. It landed with the weight of something moved a long distance. "Good," I said. "Is that all?" "No. But the rest of it I'll say better in a different location." She tilted her head. Where? Anywhere. Everywhere. I reached across and touched her face. Just briefly, a thumb at her cheekbone, a gesture that still felt like a question I was learning to ask better. She leaned into it, just slightly, just the warmth of it. Come on, let's find somewhere to be. We found a lot of somewheres, walks in places she'd been meaning to go but hadn't, a movie theater that showed older films on Saturday mornings, a bookshop where she spent 40 minutes in one aisle while I sat on the floor with a stack of things pulled at random, and she'd look over at intervals with the expression of someone who'd become fond of something and had stopped being surprised by it. I paid attention to her the way I'd been paying attention for months. Only now, without the drawer, without the filing system, without the sensible decision not to look at it directly. Just the attention itself, which turned out to feel like something I'd been carrying and had finally been able to put down. She paid attention to me differently than anyone else had. Precisely. She noticed when I was tired before I said so and would shift whatever we were doing slightly toward quiet without making a thing of it. She remembered things I'd mentioned once and brought them up at exactly the right later moment. She knew my particular silence when I was stuck on something creative, different from my other silences, and she left it alone and then was there when it broke. One evening, late, sitting on the floor of my apartment because we'd started talking and somehow never made it to the couch, she leaned forward and kissed me, not for the first time, but each time still felt like an answer to something I'd been asking in a slightly different way. Her hand came to my face, and I kissed her back with the specific relief of someone who'd been navigating around something for a long time and had finally decided to stop. I wasn't going to let you call it fake, she said, against my mouth. At the end of the weekend, I was going to make you have the conversation. You did make me have the conversation. You'd been planning to just drive home and be sensible about it. I'd been planning to be reasonable, yes. Reasonable, she repeated, like the word was fond and slightly ridiculous in equal measure. I'm a reasonable person. You're the most reasonable person I know. She pulled back enough to look at me. I'm very glad you stopped being that for one evening. I'm very glad you made me. She smiled, the real one, the fast, bright one that slipped past whatever she was usually managing, and I thought, here is the place I'm going to keep coming back to. It was Ren who called 3 weeks after the reunion, on a Tuesday evening when I happened to be at Petra's, nominally for dinner, actually because dinner had been ready for 20 minutes and neither of us had gotten up. Petra answered with the relaxed ease she had with Ren, now that there was nothing to explain. I watched from the kitchen, leaning against the counter, eating a piece of bread from the basket she'd bought from the good bakery down the street. They talked for a while. Heard Petra give a version of how the past few weeks had gone, not the efficient summary she'd have offered before, but something more honest, more like someone talking about something they were glad to be talking about. Then Ren said something that made Petra glance at me. Give me a second, Petra said, and lowered the phone. Ren wants to know if you'd come to her birthday thing in November, back in Halcyon Bay. I met her eyes. As what? A pause. The kind that's brief because the answer has always been obvious. As mine, she said. I smiled. Yeah, obviously. She raised the phone. She says yes. A pause. No, Ren. She didn't need convincing. Stop making it into a thing. Another pause. Then she laughed. The unguarded one, at something I didn't catch, and it was the best sound in the room, and probably the building. She ended the call and looked at me, not fully composed. Something warmer. She's going to make this her entire personality. Ren approves, I said. That seems good. Ren has been invested in my happiness for 15 years. She's also been right about most things. Sounds like Bex. Yes. Petra came to where I was standing at the counter. Stopped close. They should probably meet. They'd be dangerous together. Insufferably correct in the same room. That is exactly what I said. I reached up and tucked the loose strand back again, The one that always came free, that always needed the same small gesture. She let me, the way she always let me, like she'd decided some things were allowed, and this was one of them. Dinner's cold. Dinner's been cold for 20 minutes. Then we're even with it. She looked at me steadily, close enough that the lamplight caught the line of her face. Remy. Yeah, I think you know what I'm going to say. I think I do. Do you want me to say it anyway? Yes, I said. I absolutely do. She looked at me without performance, without any of the careful composure she'd arrived in my life carrying. Just Petra, standing in her own kitchen with the city outside and the cold dinner behind us, and her heart entirely visible. I love you, she said. I think I have been for a while. I was just being very sensible about it. You've never been sensible about it, I said. You mentioned me in October. That's not. You packed a cooler with good sandwiches. That's called being prepared. You put my coffee on my desk for 8 months without mentioning it. She opened her mouth, closed it. You asked me specifically, I said. Out of everyone you could have asked, you asked me. Fine, she said. And she was almost laughing. Almost. The kind of almost that has tears in it if you press too hard. Fine. I have never been sensible about it. Neither have I. I took her face in my hands carefully. The way you hold things that matter. I love you too. I've been filing it away in a drawer for months, and I'd like to stop. Please stop, she agreed. I kissed her, and she kissed me back. And outside the city kept going, with its ordinary city life, and the dinner stayed cold, and neither of us minded at all, because some evenings are more important than dinner, and this was one of them. We went back to Halcyon Bay in November. Wren's birthday, a smaller gathering, the same resort but quieter now, the coast gray and wild in the November way, stripped of September's gold, and better for it somehow. Petra stood on the porch where we'd arrived the first time. I stood beside her. No deal between us. No signals to remember. No performance to maintain. Just her hand in mine, and the bay going steel gray below, and Wren inside, making a completely unnecessary amount of noise about birthday cocktails. Last time you were doing the okay thing, the whole drive up, I said. I was not doing the okay thing. Petra. I was doing it a lot, she admitted. And now? She looked at the bay, at the fog coming in over the water slow and gray, at the harbor lights beginning to come on in the early November dusk. Now I'm not doing anything. I'm just standing here. That's significant progress. It really is. She squeezed my hand. I feel like I've done a lot of things for the first time this year. Actually being somewhere. Actually wanting something without trying to manage it first. She looked over at me. Actually standing on a porch with someone I love without calling it a deal. That's the important one, I said. That's definitely the important one. Inside, Wren made a noise of triumph about something. Petra smiled. The real one. The fast one that had always been there, but I could see fully now. And I thought about October, and the elevator, and the spreadsheets, and the coastal highway, and a pull-out mattress, and a word that had been gathering for months. I thought about all the things we'd been paying attention to before we were allowed to say so. I thought about how the most honest thing we'd done had been the thing we'd called fake, and how that had turned out to be the beginning of everything. Come on, she said. We owe Wren the full story. We're going to be there all night. We have all night. She pulled me toward the door, and I went, and the bay was cold and gray and beautiful behind us, and the lights inside were warm ahead of us, and somewhere between here and October, and the wine bar, and the deal that wasn't, and the word I'd finally said in her kitchen, I understood that this is what the most real thing looks like. It looks exactly like this.